Hello, welcome back to the June issue of Talking Pictures. I'm Mary Stack.
I'm Michael Dow.
And today we're going to thrill you with a synopsis of the films we've been looking at recently, both in the movie house and on Netflix.
And we only disliked some of them.
And they're going to be Late Night,
The Dead Don't Die,
Rocketman, Rolling Thunder Revue,
and the nondescript title, The Circus.
Okay, well, we'll start with Late Night. So I went to see this because, of course, I love Emma Thompson and she rarely puts her foot wrong theatrically. It's okay. So the concept is, I liked the concept, which is a late night talk show hosted by a woman, which, you know, there aren't many of those to the pound. So I like the idea of that. Unfortunately, it's not that funny. And also, her character isn't that believable. She's fast, you know, acerbic, sarcastic. There's this kind of a Spitfire delivery. But unfortunately, the character isn't really likable. And I don't think you've got to be a kind of, can we say the word in the traditional term, to be funny. There are a lot of funny women that aren't that way. But here's the things that were good about it.
Well, my question on that too, is she redeemable? Because she doesn't have to be likable, but is she convincingly redeemable?
Well, that's the other point. She undergoes a character change, and that is really hard to kind of stomach. It wasn't really believable. Anyway.
She's brought down a peg, isn't she, so to speak?
She's brought down a peg, but only in self-interest.
Okay.
You know, to survive. She wants the show to survive. So anyway, what happens is she's got an all-male crew of writers, which is not that incredible. I mean, probably typical, I'd say. However, she calls them by number, not by name. I mean, come on.
It's not terribly subtle, is it?
Well, it's not even real. I don't know if anyone would have that kind of a relationship or non-relationship with the writers. If you're doing an intimate every night show, you have to know the person you're writing the jokes for. Anyway, this girl, Mindy Kaling, who's the co-star, she's brought in as the token diverse female hire into the crew.
Is she hired for that purpose? Or?
She is, very, very much so, and she knows it. And the thing is that she's not an obvious hire. She comes from an engineering background or something. Anyway, the girl, Mindy Kaling, wrote the script, and she wrote the script for Emma Thompson, sent it to her, because she's got a love affair by her own admission with Emma Thompson. Emma Thompson loved it. So she got her to sign up very quickly. So there's this kind of relationship that develops between the two of them, even though they've got very different cultural backgrounds, class backgrounds. They actually end up being kind of mates. But the thing is, it's not that funny. I think that's the thing I found. I like the idea of this insight into the all-male bastion of the entertainment world, which I think is probably true. And what women maybe have to do to survive in that.
Yeah, that it's still true.
Yes, yes it is. So I think that possibly was the only redeeming nature. So I think it had a great idea, wasn't quite well executed enough for me.
Well, my impression of it, and granted I haven't seen it, so I'm just hypothesizing, it looks to me like another one of those movies where you have characters who are more like mouthpieces for their given or respective agendas.
For a platform, exactly.
Yeah, and you know, that identity politics, for some people for better, for others for worse, seems to kind of take over or kind of supersede character insight or character development.
There's no space there.
Yeah, that they speak their ideology, and that creates nothing but kind of conflict between the characters, rather there being a kind of mutual understanding or insight that develops between them. I mean, I don't know. It reminds me a little bit, because the movie The Big Sick that came out last year, I couldn't stand it. It was just people always, you know, espousing an agenda.
Pontificating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be very satisfied with itself, operating on a certain level. Does Late Night suffer from that? Or as I would put it, does it suffer from that?
It did for me. I mean, I was not rolling in the aisles, and I expected to be. You know, I mean, funny women. We've got Lucille Ball. We've got the whole cast of Saturday Night Live.
Joan Rivers would be the ideal precedent for a character like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a film like this. It's like, again, you can be political, whatever. You can be explicit and pedantic about it, but make it funny, make it entertaining. You know, win your audience over so that you give them food for thought, right?
So, good attempt. Young Indian director, and she's Canadian but Indian descent. Nisha Ganantra, who I've not come across before. She's done this other movie called Chutney Popcorn, which I don't know if that was
Title is vaguely
an
familiar.
indie film. She's done a series called Transparent for TV, and that got an award.
With Jeffrey Tambor, right? Yeah.
So she's someone to watch for sure.
Okay.
Okay, so you, Michael, are going to tell us about The Dead Don't Die.
Yeah, let's get my disappointment out of the way.
Which I love the cast name, but I
Yeah.
don't like zombies, so I didn't see it.
Yeah, well, the cast is brilliant and extensive, and it features a lot of kind of like indie film favorites. Chloe Sevigny is in it. Iggy Pop plays a zombie. But mainly
Tom Waits, isn't Tom Waits?
Tom Waits is in it. Thanks for reminding me. I used to be a Tom Waits fan. This film questions everything. Well, it's a Jim Jarmusch movie, and I love Jim Jarmusch. I mean, he's one of the icons, really, of independent cinema, getting his start in the mid-'80s with a series of films, Stranger Than Paradise, Down by Law, incredible films. Very deadpan, there's a certain kind of transcendental...
No pun intended.
Yes, exactly. There's like a transcendental everydayness to his films that is extraordinary. If you can tune into his wavelength, they're really wonderful films. They're kind of pre-Seinfeldian, where you get the sense of nothing really happens, you know, and yet it's profound in its nothingness. Okay, so let's get the pretentious stuff out of the way. So I've been a long-time fan of Jim Jarmusch, and it's strange with this movie because as far as I can tell, it's his first really concentrated attempt at a genre film. I mean, he's made road movies, so to speak. He kind of sort of made a samurai movie, but not really. Whereas this is an outright horror comedy, or at least ostensibly claims to be. It's got a lot of issues. What I think Jarmusch was going for is that he wanted to make a movie about the undead and marry it with his extreme deadpan sensibility. So there are wonderful little moments throughout the film where you really get a sense of, okay, this is Jarmusch at his best. It's infused with, again, his way of seeing the world in this kind of detached, bemused way. But the story itself is completely unexceptional. The film seems to be all too aware of the outworn cliches of the zombie film, which we already have too much of. We have a glut of it in the first place. So I don't really even understand why Jarmusch tackled it. You know, like, why is he making a genre film? I just sat there, kept asking myself questions. Another issue with the movie, too, that it is overly self-aware, but not in a good way, okay? The film begins...
self-conscious?
Very self-conscious, but again, it almost like it uses self-awareness as a recourse rather than, you know, something that becomes like a humorous thread throughout the movie.
So what is the plot, Mike?
Well, the plot, well, it's like any other zombie movie. It's set in this kind of fictional town called Centerville. With everyday people, and all of a sudden these zombies start attacking. Something cosmic might be happening. The excuse is that there's this polar fracking going on. So the film makes this, there's another quality about it that isn't very Jarmusch-ish or Jarmusch-esque, where it's very overt, you know. It's making an overt commentary on Trump America. It's making an overt commentary on environmentalism. Nothing subtle about it, and it's like, is this Jarmusch? It's almost to the point where it's like, what is this? It's like he wrote it, he takes credit for it, but it's like someone imitating Jarmusch.
A zombie.
Yeah, exactly. But it's very sardonic. It has the kind of hip irony that Jarmusch is known for. But it falls,
Chardonnay and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, it had a number of cameos in it, but it just completely falls flat in a very unfortunate way. One of the telling moments, there was a woman who starred in his first film, Stranger Than Paradise, named Esther Ballant. And she's like every hipster's dream girl, okay? And she is in this movie. And when I first saw her on the screen, it's like, wow, this is phenomenal. Oh, he's going back to his roots, da-da-da. And it's a telling sign because she's one of the first characters to get eaten by a zombie. I'm like, you know, it's like the soul of the movie is gone. But another thing they do as well, there's the theme song of the movie, which is, it's cute at first. You have the opening credits with the theme song, and then the theme song keeps popping up throughout the movie, and characters are commenting on it, so much so that Adam Driver's character says, the song comes on the radio again, oh, this is the theme song. And they start talking about the movie they're in.
That's really
It's cute at first, but then by the end of the film, it's like, just shoot me, stop doing it, stop being self-referential for no point whatsoever. You know, it's a very unfortunate exercise. Ultimately, it's a nice attempt, but it doesn't congeal. It just falls apart, and it's very predictable, and combined with the fact that the film knows it's predictable only makes it worse. So
it dies the death.
Exactly, and last thing I'll say, it's like as you're watching it, I begin thinking, I can't wait to get home and Google like what went wrong with the production. Where did Jarmusch stop believing in the project? That's what I want to know. I was more interested in why it failed than bothering to care about it, even as I was watching it.
So now we actually agree on something here.
Yes.
We went to see a film, both saw the same film separately, and we both liked it.
Mm-hmm.
And the film is Rocketman.
Yeah.
And it's directed by Dexter Fletcher. Mm-hmm. And it's a kind of an extravaganza for your eyes, but it's also this very heartfelt, moving odyssey. So it starts with this sad little insecure Reggie Dwight, which is Elton John's real name, growing up in this love-deprived household. And the structure of the film is very clever. So you have these big jukebox versions of his hits, which are actually wonderful, choreographed, magnificent costumes.
Really hyper.
Really cool.
Some of it's very, very energetic. Yeah.
And then that's interspersed with his life story, which is kind of told through therapy sessions in AA, which is such a clever way of doing stuff. And you wouldn't think it would work, but it does. And then Taron Egerton plays him as the grown-up musician. And he's very good. He sings all the stuff himself, which is so good at certain points.
Which is daring as well.
I mean, there's a great range of styles.
Yeah, and I got very involved in the performance. It's mildly manneristic here and there, a little bit too, kind of imitating of gestures. But those are rare moments. For the most part, he really does embody.
He's incredible. Anyway, I think what I like most about this, Michael, because we both had very different views about Bohemian Rhapsody, is that unlike Bohemian Rhapsody, where I learned nothing about the interior life of Freddie Mercury, I came away with not just a better understanding of Elton John, but a newfound respect for his work. And also the lyrics, because they're used so cleverly in the film, and you really see the poignancy.
Yeah, you find they suggest threads between his personal life. And it was interesting what you were mentioning too about how much of a kind of context the film gives you. It gives, for me, I got a context both of his upbringing, his family life. We could talk about the musical moments if you want to. I mean, somewhat uneven, but some of them work so exquisitely well. Early on in the film, when we're still in the childhood stage of his upbringing, of his life, they used the song "I Want Love." Is that the song? It's a later hit that he had, anyway. And each family member takes a verse, so that you get the son singing a verse from it, and then the father singing, talking about how unsatisfied they are in their family lives. So you get a sense of the interior of his personal life, and then we gradually move into the interior of his psyche and what drove him. And so the Elton John character will often say things, kind of articulate what's really boiling beneath the surface and what's really going on almost subconsciously, so to speak, with the character. There's a great deal of psychological and emotional insight, again, that you do not get with Bohemian Rhapsody at all.
No, not at all.
This gives me another reason to hate Bohemian Rhapsody, because the very unfair comparison. The fact that one movie kind of seems to piggyback on the other is, I think that's people's false impression. Whereas Rocketman is everything Bohemian Rhapsody isn't.
Definitely.
Most importantly for your reason, but then also the musical numbers as well. I mean, it's one thing to kind of replay the old records, but in Rocketman, they do a number of very clever things with the songs. First of all, they're interpreted by the actors, and many of the characters sing the songs. It's not just Elton John. Yeah. So there's that. And number two, they truncate the songs so that you get these.
Get the whole version.
The whole film
which you
gives
don't
you
need.
Impressions of stages of his life, and the songs likewise are like that. Yeah, the songs are like just these impressions. And I think it's a very smart thing to do, because we're all so familiar with all of these songs. We don't need to have the clap along moments that you get in a Bohemian Rhapsody.
Like Mamma Mia.
Yeah, they really use the songs, and the songs become kind of poetic parallels to what's occurring at moments in the film.
And it's so artistic. I mean, we both we don't want to tell you everything, but there's one particular scene where he repeatedly has near-death experiences with addiction
and suicide.
Yeah. And there's a point where he's in this pool in Beverly Hills and he's underwater and he's going he's basically dying.
Yeah, into the abyss.
Yeah. And then they do that beautiful thing
And
with
that's where
Rocketman and
Rocketman,
this
out of the
child.
blue, yeah, well, he keeps having
Himself.
there are a couple of times in the films where he
When
has
am I
these
gonna get my
revisitations
hug?
of
When am
himself
I-
as a
when are you
child.
gonna hug me?
Yeah, and this, again, you want to talk about something where you're walking a fine line. I mean, this could have been so sentimental.
Yeah, and it wasn't.
Yeah, the little boy they had playing him, not necessarily a good actor, but that doesn't
I
matter.
thought he was
The boy
superb.
embodies,
I think it was so believable,
the
that
sense
child.
of, and again, not to give much away, but that returns near the very end of the film, and I'm like, I shouldn't be falling for this. This is so cliche, and yet it's so well done. And
It is.
Again, it's brief, and the film is very brisk, and it flows so beautifully from one musical number to another, from one kind of dramatic set piece to another.
Beautifully timed, the whole
Yeah,
thing.
without it
Didn't
feeling
feel like
rushed.
2 hours at
Yeah.
all. And the last thing is that I liked was the Jamie Bell playing Bernie Taupin, who was such a beautiful, positive influence in his life, and he's constant throughout.
Yeah, and he's the one
He
who's
never
keeping an eye
changes.
on Elton John all the time.
Yeah, he really genuinely cares for him in a way that none of the other hangers-on and horrible people come across his path. I mean,
well, and also
a piece of him.
the manager, who he has the relationship with. But again, by way of contrast, I'm sorry I don't remember his name. Should have made a note of it. I don't remember the name, but he was the same manager that had a relationship with Freddie Mercury. And so if you really want to have a study in contrast, think of the depiction, the black and white, good versus evil contrast of Bohemian Rhapsody versus the nuanced character in Rocketman.
Yeah, very complex.
Okay, that the manager actually has an argument to make. It's not just, the big rock star getting screwed over by the greedy manager.
Yeah.
It's a lot more subtle. And again, we're talking about a jukebox musical that also manages to go very deep into the psyche, not only of one character, but multiple characters.
Many,
yeah.
So 4 stars from me.
Yeah.
I was expecting to be entertained. I was, but I was not expecting to be so moved, and I was really moved.
Exactly. I mean, I celebrate it for what it does as a mainstream movie. Again, it's a bit uneven, I have to say, because I have to always be the fly in the ointment a little bit. I hated the very last thing. That's all I'll say.
Don't tell anybody what it is, because you'll blow it.
They kind of ruined my favorite Elton John song. I'll just say that, but that's, okay. People can see it and then hunt me down and argue with me about it. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, wonderful.
All right, staying in the music genre, I watched a Netflix documentary. Martin Scorsese's just done this interesting...
Scorsese.
Scorsese.
I keep meaning to correct you.
You say it.
Scorsese.
Scorsese.
Yeah.
Is that how the Italians say it?
Well, that's how he says it, and it's his name.
Okay. Fair enough, now we know.
Mary's going to punch me after this.
That's fine. Anyway, we know who we mean. In 1975, Dylan took it upon himself to do this thing called the Rolling Thunder Revue, which it's quite interesting. There's lots of contradictions in this strange film.
And this is a period where he was kind of emerging out of a longer period of...
Yeah, he'd broken up with the band or had stopped touring with the band, and he comes out and decides to do this, I don't know, old troubadour-y idea of touring the country with a band of merry musicians. Merry, maybe not quite the right word. And it turns into a disastrous tour of America.
This is about 1975, right?
Yeah. So there's this kind of really interesting, fun blend of footage. You've got documentary footage, news footage of Carter and Nixon, people on the streets in the 1775, 1776 celebrating the bicentennial. It's quite it's an interesting slice of America. Then you've got old Bob himself, who is most of the time wearing this flowery hat and white mannequin makeup for most of the performances. So he takes on a new persona completely in this film. And also there's this incredible hodgepodge of people interviewed on the film, involved with this. Joan Baez, Allen Ginsberg uttering poetic things, I love him. Sharon Stone turns up being added to the busload at one point. Not quite sure.
Because why not?
Well, she said she wasn't quite sure what she would do, but she never tells us what she did do. Patti Smith does a very strange version of a song. Joni Mitchell does one of the best versions I've ever heard of Coyote. Live, she's practicing it. And Sam Shepard's in the film as well. He was a friend of Dylan. So we go across country. He's driving a Winnebago. That's the bus. Dylan's up front driving the Winnebago. Oh,
I have got to see this.
Tame. So anyway, you got the manager saying it was a financial catastrophe, and then they've got this very mumbling Dylan who interjects, about what he thought, what he didn't thought. First, he can't even remember going on the tour.
I love your Dylan, by the way. It's fantastic.
And then he says, "Oh, it was very successful," and he says, "Oh, maybe not financially, but it was an adventure." Okay, so anyway, and there's a woman on there, this odd woman who's a brilliant violinist who keeps a snake in her trunk. I mean, it's like a cast of characters. You couldn't invent these people. They don't need to perform. They're already odd by nature, but very talented too. And then we've got the ultimate sort of twist at the end. Is Rolling Thunder, how did the name happen? And one guy says, well, maybe it was that Dylan heard thunder, but it also is, the Native Americans believe it means speaking truth. And when they said that to Dylan, he says, I like that. And then finally someone said, but it's also the name of the bombing operation for Cambodia. So what was the true story? So we end like all these things of, is it true? Is it fantasy? Did it ever happen?
Dylan is like the great walking contradiction. I mean, he's the great figure for that.
Yeah. It's a fun, watch it. It's just a mishmash, a hodgepodge. It's like a circus.
Yeah.
A bit like a circus.
And it gets into that kind of relativity of truth, and this kind of American ideal of being able to invent yourself, and then for that matter to reinvent yourself, and the fluidity of one's own truth, right, is interesting. So my Netflix pick, somewhat relative to that, I suppose, is a documentary called The Circus, which I'm actually in the middle of now. It's 4 hours, so you got to bear with me. But I'll tell you what I've seen so far. I'm actually quite smitten with. It focuses really on the rise of the phenomenon of the circus itself, and how, again, how it is interwoven with so many precedents that we now take for granted. How the circus basically kind of created mass entertainment, the way the circus basically popularized spectacle in American culture. Specifically, and there's a very distinct. It's a part of the American Experience series, which I love in general, but it in a very methodical way goes through like the variants of the circus. So it talks about the way in which the freak show. There would be like three primary experiences when you go to the circus in the late 19th century, from the 1870s onward. You would have the freak show, then you would have the menagerie, which is basically the precursor to the zoo, and then you would have the kind of big top show. And of course, this is primarily the invention of P.T. Barnum, and they spend a lot of time on Barnum. They also talk about how he got involved with these entrepreneurs, Costello and Coop. And so
it's an American story.
It's distinctively American. I mean, taking the European tradition of these shows and kind of combining them into this larger spectacle. So a couple things that it really gets into, again, with Barnum, it's relatively well known that he is pretty much he was the most recognizable figure of the 19th century, largely due to his ballyhoo. But also, what I found even more interesting about Barnum in general is that he's really the inventor of the kind of the hustler. He embodied it, I should say, the American hustler. And what's especially fascinating, and not to put too fine a point on it in terms of where we are nowadays, but the fascinating thing about Barnum in relation to the circus was, and in relation to kind of selling and marketing the circus, was that he would lie to the public, right to their faces. And what's interesting,
the connection between this and politics.
You might want to sit and think about it for a while. That he basically, again, kind of created this false narrative about himself, created a false reality. But what's most fascinating is that the public, and it almost causes me to reevaluate kind of the American thought process, because it wasn't as though Barnum was obscure or subtle about the lying that he did and the fakery that he invested in his product, so to speak, is that he lied to the public directly to their faces, and they loved it. So it almost gets at a certain pathology about we as Americans and how it's not that we're stupid or easily duped. It's this willingness to believe the lie, the wanting to believe the lie.
It's I just got to interject here. There's a very good book on this that has just come out, if you're interested, in this line between the American psyche and the history of the frontier and this desperate belief in something greater.
Yeah, well, manifest destiny is the great lie. You have to believe in something that you simultaneously know not to be true.
But this book is called Fantasyland, and it's by the guy that does Studio 360.
Fantastic. Yeah, actually, I read it. Yeah,
I
but I know
his name.
I'm familiar with the book.
Name?
Yeah, I know.
He does Studio 360, and it's all about how that was transported. That idea, that belief in the fantasy, going to Disney for vacation instead of going somewhere real. You repeatedly go to a fantasy place with your family.
Yes, and you choose to believe in it.
Yeah.
Right.
This is where you go to Fantasyland for your holidays.
Exactly.
When there's all these really interesting places elsewhere to go to.
Yeah, and also with the Disney example, there's so much to say about this.
Yeah,
But the thing is, it's funny because the circus is really the first example, and Disney is like the 20th century iteration of this. But in the 19th century, this idea that the circus combined fantasy and the imaginary with the real, with the scientific. One of the main reasons why circuses incorporated animals in the first place was to, so to speak, raise the respect level of the circus, so that you don't just go for, you know, the indulgence and the hedonism, you go to learn about animals. And there's even a segment in the film where they talk about...
learn about them?
Yeah, well, it's like, so on the one hand, you see a hippopotamus for the first time, and it's this exotic thing, while at the same time, it's this almost anthropological encounter. You know, you're learning about this animal from another country, another land, and they treated the humans the same way. So the documentary gets a lot into the exploitation of humans, Barnum being chief among them. He actually would incorporate slaves into his act back, you know, this is pre-Civil War times, into his act. So the exploitation of animals, the exploitation of humans. So again, it doesn't shy away from the ugly reality of it, but then also really does justify why we need the circus, whether it's freak shows or whether it's,
we've got reality television, which
you can see it really does provide you this sense of a lineage in terms of what Americans are seduced by or willfully seduced by.
Believe it.
Willfully.
Yeah. Well, wow. That's brought up a lot of interesting questions there. I don't know if I could sit through 4 hours of it. It's worth 4 hours?
It's very well, yeah. It's very well done. It's very. I'm sitting there. You know, it's one of those shows where I'm like, you're watching it. It's like I'm pausing it, constantly scribbling notes. I'm like, so many factoids that are worth remembering.
Maybe it should be shown as a kind of PBS series in 4 parts.
Well, yeah. It's American. It is. It's Circus American experience. So it's PBS and Netflix.
Oh, so it is. Interesting.
It is. Yeah.
Oh, you didn't mention that.
Yeah.
So it has got an educational thrust.
Yes, and it's entertaining, just like the circus. Educational and entertaining at the same time, as it were. Yeah.
You didn't get that off a poster, did you?
No, I didn't. No, just spewed from my the dark recesses of my mind.
Okay, on that high note about Michael and I making a spectacle of ourselves, I'm going to say goodbye for now from Mary Stack.
I'd say it's more of a freak show, but that's besides the point. And goodbye from me, Michael Dow.
See you soon.